Hey everybody, it is Cam here from the Nerd Book Review. Today I will be reviewing Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. It is the first book in the Farseer Trilogy, which is the first trilogy in the larger realm of the Elderlings series. 16 books and a collection of short stories, 4 trilogies and a quadrilogy. It started in 1995, so a little bit of a classic these days, and was completed in 2017. So if completed series are important to you, there are all the trilogies are a little bit self-contained. I know that you can start either of the first 2 trilogies and be okay. I imagine that you'll have to read those first 2 trilogies before you go on to later stuff because some of the same characters are still there. This is, I will admit, my second go-around of recording this review. I tried to do my first one the same manner that I normally do, where I break everything down, like world building, magic, plot, then characters and all that stuff. But the way that it's written, I feel like it really muddied things up. I realized that I forgot like one of the main plot points when I was doing it all. So just all around, I didn't think it was something that I was going to try to recover. And this round, I'm not going to break things down into quite such distinct sections before I move on to the bad, the good, and my own final thoughts. Let's go ahead and read the book blurb. This one, as I have mentioned multiple times, I feel like new book blurbs give you like every bit of detail of the storyline. And so sometimes I'll start to talk about something that theoretically is a spoiler, or at least I would consider it a spoiler, but then it's already been mentioned in detail in the book blurb. This one, being 30 years old, is more of the old true style, which keeps things a little bit quieter and a little bit tighter. All right, here is that book blurb. In a faraway land where members of the royal family are named for the virtues they embody, one young boy will become a walking enigma. Born on the wrong side of the sheets, Fitz, son of chivalry Farseer, is a royal bastard, cast out into the world, friendless and lonely. Only his magical link with animals, the old art known as the wit, gives him solace and companionship. But the wit, if used too often, is a perilous magic and one abhorred by the nobility. So when Fitz is finally adopted into the royal household, he must give up his old ways and embrace a new life of weaponry, scribing, courtly manners, and how to kill a man secretly as he trains to become a royal assassin. Okay, right off the bat, we can see that we have Fitz. Fitz chivalry, as he will be called occasionally, most of the time just Fitz, which is a pejorative term for bastard in this world. We are dealing with a place called the Six Duchies. From what I read, Hobb, which is actually a pen name for the author, which I did not write down what her name was. She went with Robin Hobb because she felt that it was an androgynous enough name to still be able to sell books in the largely male-dominated fantasy world at that time. And so that's where we get the Robin Hobb. And then it just happened to end up being one of the best-selling fantasy series of all time. The edition that I'm reading said something like the 42nd printing. So there are, it's sold millions of copies worldwide. It has been translated to like 30 different languages. Very, very popular series. I'm sure that there are probably quite a few of you guys who have actually read this series before. I know that I tend to want to look at reviews of books that I've already read as opposed to books that I haven't yet. And so I like to kind of see, whether the reviewer felt the same way I did or not. Getting back into this, let's talk about the world. I will do the geography of that, and then we'll get into, more of a combined, character, plot, all that kind of stuff. We're dealing with a Western European style medieval society. They call it the Six Duchies. You have 4 coastal duchies. There will be a map up here. I've got a copy that has some beautiful illustrations, so I'm going to throw a bunch of those in as I do this episode. So you have the 4 coastal duchies. They are a mix of population of like the original inhabitants and a group called the Out Islanders, who think Vikings for them and think like Western Europeans for the people who are on the continent. They were invaded, and the ruling family, the Farseers, comes from those Out Islands. And now, hundreds and hundreds of years later, a lot of the blood between the old Out Islanders and the people who were on the continent already is mixed, and they're very distinct from the people in the two inland duchies, who are more like farm boy types, think. They're lighter skinned in inland and bigger as a general rule. Then you have on the other side the mountains, and there's a mountain kingdom there. To the south is a kingdom that we don't spend any time in for this series, but I know that we do in the next trilogy. So we're going to mostly spend most of our time, especially in this first book, Assassin's Apprentice, most of the time will be spent on the coastal duchies, but we will see a trip through the inland duchies into the mountain kingdom as well. Now, one thing I did really like about this series, though, is that so we are dealing with like a Western feudal style, society, but we have a lot more equality of the sexes in this one. There are female soldiers. Females can inherit. They can be, business owners, things like that. If a female daughter is the oldest born, then she will inherit land over boys as well. So I really enjoyed that part of it, and while still getting that Western feudal feel to it. And it's funny too, because as this one is really a classic now at this point, being from the early 90s or the mid 90s, it is something that's kind of nice to see in one of those series. And if that's something that matters a little bit to you, especially since a lot of my audience is reading indie novels, and that might be a category that you care about. And so that's something that Robin Hobb really does. Geography-wise, you should be able to see on this map that was up that she actually lived in Alaska at the time she started writing this series. And so the map was supposed to be like an inverted representation kind of Alaska, the islands off of it, and then the Pacific Northwest. But apparently it got flipped over when it was originally done, so it looks more like the coast of Alaska. It is kind of like a colder Northern European style for the most part, until you get to like that middle part. I think that's enough of the world that we live in. The only thing I will say is it's a really low magic system. It mentions in the book blurb the wit. There's also one other magic style called the skill. The wit is an older magic, and in later books, it'll be called the old blood. And very few people can use the wit or the skill. I would say as far as the skill goes, it's very, very rare. For the most part, you only end up with people with the skill who are from that Farseer line I mentioned that rule the six duchies. They're the kings and queens. When they mix their blood with the people from Buckkeep, which is where the duchy where the capital is, it's actually the capital of Buck, but the place is called Buckkeep. When their blood had mixed, it led to that magical ability called the skill. But for the most part, there's only like 2 or 3 master practitioners of it in the entire world that we know of in this first book. And it's certainly not more than like a few dozen to a few hundred total that would have any ability, even if they were taught. The wit has a little bit more, and that's like an animal beast magic. Fitz is able to imprint with mostly dogs or wolves or things like that, actually, and form a bond with them. They can actually like mentally link together and see through each other's eyes and speak. And different people with different wit will have different abilities. It is something that is very, very frowned upon. You can be like hung and drawn and quartered for using it. So it's something that has to be kept secret. Okay, so let's get into talking about the plot and how the book is written right now real quick. The story is told as a chronicles, kind of. The beginning of every chapter will have a little excerpt from those chronicles, and then we'll get into a first person of the only point of view character, Fitz. And he is writing these chronicles and these memories down as trying to write a histories of the 6 duchies as he is an old man. So that's one thing we know right off the bat. That no matter what happens throughout the story, Fitz lives because he's in his 60s or 70s when he's writing these chronicles, and so we know that that's going to happen. And that's something that right off the bat I was kind of questioning whether I was going to enjoy or whether I thought that was going to somehow compromise the story. As I'll show, I really feel like it did not compromise it in any way. In fact, I think if anything, I actually feared more for Fitz because of the way that I feel like Hobb compensated for us as audience knowing that Fitz lives this whole time. So the way the story starts, as I mentioned, Fitz is writing these chronicles down and trying to write those histories, but he keeps getting sidetracked into his own memories and his own history. Although with as much as he is involved in throughout the history of the Six Duchies, it really is a history that he should be a big part of. So he starts off, he's 6 years old. He is dropped off on the doorstep of a keep where his father is supposed to be. His father's not actually there. His father is Chivalry, as mentioned. He is the king in waiting. He's the heir to the Farseer throne. And its official title, King in Waiting, or the person that's supposed to become the next king. It kind of helps them. They have a lot of power. They're sent off to do a lot of things like diplomacy and stuff where the king usually stays in his castle at Buckkeep for defense. The king in waiting is the one that tends to go out and do a lot more stuff. So Chivalry, with his name, he's supposed to be a very chivalrous person, as is mentioned in the book blurb, that they're named something that their hope will be like their keystone trait. So Chivalry is supposed to be chivalrous. Verity is supposed to be the solid, steady person that helps his brother. And then Regal will be the youngest of the princes. He has a different mother. He does not get along well with the other two princes they get along with him, but he's very duplicitous, as I'll mention as I get more into the plot. And Regal, he dresses kind of fancy and does a lot of things that make him seem like he should be more royal than the other two. Chivalry's not there, but his main right-hand man, Burrich, it might be Burrick, Burrich. I've read them, not listened on audiobook, so I always, in my mind, it was Burrich. He is basically like in charge of all of the animals for Chivalry in his stables, and he'll pretty quickly then end up going up to Buckkeep, the capital, and being their stable master as well. When Chivalry leaves him behind, he ends up being the person that takes care of young Fitz. Like I mentioned, he starts off at 6. Pretty quickly into the story, he ages and goes up to, like, say, 11 or 12. That's where, like, a meat of the story starts off as him about 12. And then it'll go for another 2 or 3 years. I think he's 15 or 16 when the end of this first book happens. But the meat of it will be, him as basically a young teen, late adolescence. And he is raised by Burrich and a man named Chade, who is the master assassin. It's obviously in the book blurb and in the book title, so it's not much of a surprise that Fitz ends up being trained as the assassin's apprentice to the master assassin. And part of the reason is that he is a bastard. He's never going to be able to inherit or be in line for the throne. But the way that their society works, bastards aren't completely shunned. Now, there's a good chance he could have been killed right off the bat because he is a threat to the Farseer line as a bastard. But as long as he is part of their, the group and has sworn his fealty to them, then he can still be used. He's a great assassin because because of his royal blood, he still could be able to go out and do diplomatic things, but he's never going to be the main focus, right? So when he goes out and does stuff, he's always with Regal or Verity. And so he can kind of be off on the side and make a good assassin because of that, because he's, got enough power to be anywhere that he should be and not enough to be in the spotlight. So we'll get to see him as he's raised and as, basically Chade and Burrich raise him between the two of them. It's obviously not an ideal childhood for Fitz. He's very lonely an awful lot of the time. Now getting into like the main plot line, there's two big storylines here in this first book. The first is that as Fitz is about 13 or 14 years old, the 4 coastal duchies start to end up being raided by those Out Islanders, but a really fanatical cult of them. They're called the Red Ship Raiders. Instead of, just raiding and stealing goods and food and livestock, they just start to either kill everybody or, even worse, somehow magically they start to forge people, is what it's called. It takes all of their emotions away from them. And at that point, then the people that they release back into the villages are just as dangerous as those Out Islanders were, because those people, they will kill like their kids, they'll kill their parents, their other family members in order to get what they want. They have absolutely no morals or nothing that's limiting them to do whatever you might possibly want to do. It's really awful. Early on, the Out Islanders actually tell the king that if they doesn't pay a ransom, they're going to release the people who are forged, and they'll kill them all for him if they do pay the ransom. So obviously, it's not a good thing. Then the second really big thread and storyline that we're going to deal with in this is that Regal he has a different mother. King Shrewd is the father of all three. He is an older man. He's in his 60s probably when this is happening. He is the king of the Farseer line, but he had two different queens. The mother of Verity and Chivalry dies, and very soon after, he remarried to a woman named Desire. The reason we have Regal and is being named is that Desire, she actually thinks that her son should be the one that actually inherits, because her family at one point had been the kings and queens of those two inland duchies. And the duchies are very, very different. That's a really important thing to note too, that as I've mentioned, they're different looking people. The inlanders, they do lots of farming and herding, lots of grapes. Their places are much more comfortable. They don't have to worry about raiding or anything like that, because the outer duchies take care of all of that. So very different lifestyles. They don't see each other really as one kingdom. The four duchies on the outside, the coastal duchies, are one culture, and the inland ones are a very separate culture. And Regal really sees himself as an inlander, whereas the other two sons see themselves as those outer duchies people. And so Regal will do a lot of things and take a lot of actions that will harm his other two brothers in order to try to make his own claim better. So Fitz, Chade, and Burrich, especially Fitz and Chade, because, as the master assassin, he's far more involved in trying to keep things safe. They will, try to make sure that they're keeping the things safe from both the Red Ship raiders, but they also have to try to somehow stop Regal's plots. But they can't kill him or do anything to outwardly harm him, or even be known that they're doing things to disrupt his plots, because Regal still has Shrewd's heart in his mind, and he's kind of, if anything, the favored son at this point, because he's always at his ear while Verity is off doing his own thing. And I think I forgot to mention that really early on, Chivalry ends up abdicating because of his bastard son, and he goes off basically to retirement. And we don't ever see, Chivalry play any sort of large role in the story again. So Verity becomes the king in waiting, and he is spending all of his time trying to stop those Red Ship raiders through using his magic. He's probably the most powerful practitioner of the skill. And so one thing with that too, while you're using magic, you're off by yourself. He's not leading raids against these raiders, right? So Chivalry is able to basically whisper lies and slanders against Verity while he's really trying to help things. And so it's just kind of there's just plots within this story. That's probably plenty enough talking about the plot line, the main characters, and all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about the bad, the good, and my final thoughts now. Now, as far as the bad goes, I loved this book and the second one, which I've now read, and I'm actually about halfway through book 3. Those first two will absolutely be on my book of the year lists. I loved these first two books. They're 10 out of 10 for me, that hard 5+, as I've mentioned before. So you'll hear about these books, moving forward from me a couple more times as I do my winter list and my book of the year list for sure. Now, the one bad thing could be that we know that Fitz lives, right? He's telling this story from the very beginning. We know that he's an old man. So the potential for that is that we would see Fitz in danger and know that he's always going to live. And so that could have been a negative, and there's probably going to be a few people that might see that as a negative. But for where I saw it more as a negative is that as a result, I feel like Hobb overcompensates and just treats Fitz so poorly. That poor kid, I mean, he is, 13, 14 years old when most of this story takes place. He is beaten multiple times, almost to death. He's poisoned. I mean, he has a rough go of things. And I feel like maybe she thought that maybe if her readers knew that Fitz is going to live, that she's going to make sure that we still worry about him. And I worried about him an awful lot. And I've actually worried about him through the entire story. I feel like she couldn't abuse her character much more than she does. And I mean, at times it probably felt to Fitz as the character like death would have been the preferable treatment to what ends up happening to him. So that's the one thing I would say is negative, is that, man, at times it gets a little bit bleak, and with the things that happen to Fitz, especially since he's, a young teenager when most of this stuff is happening in this book. But that's my one thing that I'll put as a negative. Now, getting into the good, there's a lot. This book is really action-packed. The fight scenes, they don't go on too long at any one point where I have trouble, because sometimes I've mentioned that I have trouble like figuring out detailed fight scenes, but there's plenty of fight scenes. Fitz is a really great character. I know he starts off young, and he'll have his troubles where he's surly and a teenager and things like that. But for the most part, he's like really thrown into things. I really like too that, he does have a lot of trouble. He's an assassin's apprentice at this point, and he doesn't always do things the right way, or he makes some poor choices. He gets beaten up a lot. He's not your hero that's going to swing a sword and kill everybody. He is an assassin. And while he might be a competent fighter, he's going to face a whole lot more people that are way more competent than him. And I like that there was always that element to it, that you knew that he's not just going to move from point A to point B, power up and just become like unstoppable, as is the case in certain series, right? By the time that Rand is, into book 6 or 7, he's very regal in the Wheel of Time, and, he's only one of the Forsaken could stop him. A lot of people could stop Fitz if things didn't go his way and he wasn't careful. I also just thought that the way that the plot within the plots were done was really masterful. There are so many things going on, and she does a really good job of tying things in, separating them at times as well. And what I thought that it really did for me too, for both the first 2 books, is it just made me want to keep reading. There would be, say there's 3 or 4 plot points going on, all 4 of them were entertaining to me. And I would be reading, and say one goes on for 20 or 30 pages, and then we get to something different. Well, every single different plot point made me want to figure out what was going to happen next and what was going to happen next. And I just kept on wanting to read. I got almost a little bit cranky at times if I got interrupted. I just wanted to keep reading this book. And same with book 2. I just did not want to put it down. Between the 2 of them, they're close to 1,200 pages long, and I read them in 3 days. So I obviously just kept going. I stayed up really late a couple of times. Just absolutely loved everything about it. I thought Fitz was a pretty good character for starting off as a young character. As I mentioned, he does have his surly moments, but that's going to happen as a teenager. But for the most part, he knows what he's got to do, and he does what he's got to do. I also like just the way that we still had a feudalistic society, but we still had a lot of woman involvement in it. The captain of Verity's Guard, for example, is a woman. Women can inherit. So it was kind of a nice thing not having to deal with that misogyny while still, dealing with a Western feudalistic society. I thought that it was nice getting to see the different places. We do get to see that Mountain Kingdom and the Inland Duchies, even if it's just a very short period of time. And all in all, it was a pretty entertaining story, and I didn't have a single point where I felt like there was a lull and I just wanted to stop reading, or I felt like I could put it down at any point. I really, really loved this story. I've loved all 3 books so far. I do think that book 3 slows down a bit and is not as, as wonderful as the first 2 books, but I'm still probably going to end up with a 9 out of 10 on this, depending on how it ends. But for sure, the first 2 books are those hard 5s, 10 out of 10 for me. And I look forward to reading the entire series. I think that because it is 16 full books and then those short stories, what I'm going to have to do is probably split it up so that I'm going to read this trilogy, then I really need to get back to that TBR of mine. I'm going to end up, spending 10 days on this first trilogy and instead of reading books that I already had on my TBR. So I think that I'll do that second trilogy in April maybe, and then I'll wait until fall and do the other one, and then beginning of the year of next year, I'll do the quadrilogy that's there, and maybe try to make it something like 18 to 24 months where I finish off the entire series, and that way I can still get other stuff done. It is nice. I'll at least get to do another episode on that second trilogy since it's separate from this one and not going to be spoilery. But I'm really just enjoyed reading these books so much, and it's just been such a refreshing thing. I can't believe that I made it this long without reading this series since these books came out and were bestsellers when I was a teenager. And so it's just one of those things that I can't believe I never got around to it. And I don't know why I never got around to it. I've heard the name, obviously, for years and years, but I just didn't. And I feel like maybe it was for the best because I absolutely I think that maybe when I'd been younger, the way that Fitz is treated sometimes, I would have had dreams of just massacring everybody, since he does have two different kinds of magic, right? And theoretically, he may have been the best suited to be king in terms of in a wartime zone, but that's not going to happen. And I feel like maybe as I'm older now, I understand more like why things are the way they are, and I'm really enjoying all those other supporting characters as well. I think that I've rambled on long enough. I just want to say once again, I cannot recommend this entire trilogy high enough, and I'm excited to continue reading. And if you're like me and you tend to wait to watch these videos until after you've already read the books yourself and you just want to see what someone else thinks about it, I'm absolutely just excited to see what you also think. I want to see what your comments are, what your feelings about all of the different plot points and Fitz as a character are. And also, tell me what you thought about the next trilogies, maybe spoiler free for those other ones. But thanks for watching the video, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.